What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I've got my 1996 Mazda Miata here with me, first gen. Now this video is going to be a quick guide on when you go to look at a Miata, how to avoid buying a rusty one if that's not something that you're looking for. And this video will apply to first and second generation Miatas. So we're going to give you a quick walkthrough and just kind of explain some things to look out for. One more thing I've got to add is if you are buying a car and you're able-bodied, there is zero excuse for you to not look under the car, okay? I've seen all kinds of crazy things under cars, and I'm always amazed about, you know how many stories you hear where your buddy buys a car, he never looked under it, and it's a complete mess down there. There's no excuse unless you've got some kind of disability or something preventing you from doing so. Always look under that car. I'd rather have to wash my jeans than buy a rusty car. And it's super straightforward. Most cars, if you just kind of get in a plank position and put your head down, you can pretty much see what you need to do. So literally, like, my hands aren't dirty, I didn't get my knees dirty. There's no excuse to not look under cars. If you're spending your money on a car, you better be looking under there, because you never know what you're gonna find. Alright, now before we get too far into this video, I kind of want to just explain my philosophy behind rust. So you're asking about my credibility. Well, I've owned 12 Miatas, first generations mostly. I also owned a second gen Mazda Speed Miata. And the way I see it is, if you've got a rusty car, that's fine if you're just using it as like a beater, or if you're gonna run it into a wall or do whatever the kids are doing these days, drifting that thing into the curb and whatnot, that's fine. Buy a rusty one. Hey, as a matter of fact, it helps everybody else out. It keeps the nice ones out there for people looking to collect them and work on them. So my philosophy is kind of going to be, what rust is a deal breaker and what rust is not a deal breaker. The way I see it, I don't want to put any money into a rusty car or a ton of work into a rusty car, because if it's a car that I'm going to keep forever, I want it to be one that is pretty rust free. So we're going to walk over some quick tips that you can, if you're going to see one, you can check them out. So we're going to start with the rocker panels. Alright, so the rocker panels are a great spot to tell what kind of life your car has had. And like I said, I've owned Miatas ranging from super clean ones like this one to completely rusted out Miatas. And you get what you pay for most of the time, but the rocker rust is quite interesting. So I'll do another video on why they rust and how to prevent it. But basically, this seam here, moisture can end up in there, it can get in through here, and then your rockers start to rust out. Now, one thing that people don't realize, I feel like a lot of sellers or owners of rusty Miatas will try to minimize how much of an issue this is, but the rust on these rocker panels never really starts from the outside. It always starts from the inside. Now I'll throw in some pictures here of what the inside of the rocker looks like. And so basically, once your car starts rusting from the inside, there are a few ways that can affect your car. If it gets really far, it can go, towards your frame rail, towards your floor pan, and then it'll also creep up here, depending on what you got going on. So basically, this to me, I'm going to say for most of you, unless you're extremely skilled in fabrication, is going to be a deal breaker, because the issue is if you see this outermost skin rusting here, you don't know how bad the rust is on the inside. So I'll give you an example. One of my Miatas I had, it was a tiny bubble right about here, right? So I drilled out the spot welds down here, I cut into the rocker, and there actually ended up being, rust pretty much from here all the way up till here. There's actually a video on that car. If you go to the weight reduction video on my channel, that is that car. And luckily, on the inside, there was surface rust and stuff up till about here, but between cutting and completely wire wheeling everything back to bare metal, I was able to pretty much save the car, and the rest of it was pretty rust free. So, this to me, if you've got some skills in fabrication and you're willing to take a gamble, could be worth it. But like I said, you're gonna have to do a good amount of cutting, welding, grinding, sealing, painting. If that sounds like something you're interested in, you can definitely rescue a Miata if it just has the rocker rust. So, I wouldn't say it's quite a deal breaker. depending on the person, but to me, I would just avoid them entirely, because if you've got rust here, you probably have rust in other areas, which is what we're gonna get into next. Alright, so the next spot that people usually don't notice because it's kind of hard to see is going to be your front frame rails. So your front frame rails are right here. As you can see, that's where my sway bar mount is. Now, on the first generation Miatas, I'll be honest with you, not a ton of front frame rail rust that I've seen. You know, obviously if your car is completely rusted out and there's scaly rust and holes everywhere, I would avoid buying it entirely. But basically there was an issue with the second gen Miatas here, where the way they welded the car and folded the metal over and everything, it traps moisture in the frame rails. So I'm going to throw up a picture of an NB Miata here. So that's basically what happens with NB Miatas. So to me, I don't even like NB Miatas that much. You know, they don't have that pop-up headlight. They don't have the retro look. I personally just enjoy NAs more. Totally preference. NBs are very solid cars, and you know, I'm sure if you got one dialed in, they're gonna be quicker on the track. But for the kind of pleasure driving that I do, I'm not worried about it. So check those front frame rails out. The best way to do it is sort of stick your head right into this gap here. You kind of check them out when you're looking at the car, and yeah, so you'll be able to see it pretty clearly if there is rust here. But that's definitely a good spot to check. All right, so another super common spot is the under the front rocker here. Now the issue with this is all the leaves and stuff from here, they get washed into here, and then as you can see there are also openings in the fender liner, so a ton of rocks, mud, debris, sand and stuff will accumulate in there. And the issue is when it gets wet, it starts to hold moisture. So you will see a lot of cars where the rockers will rust out, and that's kind of like the rear. It'll rust out from the inside. Now the nice thing about these is obviously this is a removable panel here, just the front fender. So, you know, if you've got a little bit of rust here, it's definitely not the end of the world, but you need to be careful because, you know, under this it'll be the actual section where the rocker and the chassis are, you know, integrated. And if you've got rust there, then you've got a problem, because then it becomes structural and you've got issues. So always check these front fenders, just run along here. If your car has been somewhere where it's been exposed to moisture, I guarantee you that one of these 4 bolts, you know, on either side, you're gonna break them off. So that's just something to look out for too. But you should definitely clean your fenders too. All right, so another good indicator of how rusty your Miata is look up here, and do you see where the subframe bolts up to the chassis here? Look for rust in that area. Now, if this stuff has surface rust and whatnot, you have to realize that, you know, this is a box section of the frame, right? So if there is rust on the outside, I'm pretty sure there's rust on the inside, and that can be a really difficult spot to treat, because, you know, if you want to treat it properly, you'd have to cut it open and wire wheel the inside of it out. So I usually try to avoid Miatas that have rust in this area. And what I mean by that is this spot right up here. So definitely watch out for that. And then, you know, you'll also be able to see if there's a ton of rust on the subframe and stuff. It's a good indicator that there's going to be rust elsewhere. Still looking at the underside, working our way to the front. Like I said, you know, most Miatas, if they have rocker rust, you'll be able to tell pretty clearly. If there's like different welds and stuff in the seam here, that's something you look out for. These are all the factory spot welds here, so if you don't see those, might be something to look out for. But sometimes, you know, it won't bubble here, but it'll bubble down here. So make sure you get a good view of this face all the way down here, and make sure there's no bubbling or anything over there. And the next thing you can check is the frame rails right over there. So cars that are super low will have you know, scrapes on the frame rails and stuff, and if that stuff doesn't get looked after, it'll start to rust out. So keep an eye on those frame rails, make sure they're nice and straight and free of rust. All right, so the next thing you want to do is, you see these bolts in the seat right here? check those out. If these are super corroded, that means that whoever drove your car, you know, was probably driving with wet shoes or boots frequently. So what that means is, you know, you put your wet feet in here, right? And that water's got to go somewhere. So it's either going to evaporate, some of it will get absorbed in the carpet. Now these carpets do have vinyl or rubber on the back, but you know, if you've got so much water and it's so excessive that you're getting it onto the actual carpet, the issue is that water has nowhere to go. So you will see Miatas with rusty floor pans. And definitely check the seams of the floor pan. So right around here, because that's kind of where you'll see the rust start to poke out. Sometimes, you know, it starts up top first, and then it takes a minute for it to work through the metal. So check the floor pans on both sides, and that's another spot where there could be rust, so make sure you check that out. Next thing you want to do is pop your trunk. Now when you're in here, there'll be a spare tire here. You know, just kind of check this general area for rust. If your car had a super leaky top or whatever, you know, you can have rust that ends up here. Lift up this carpet a little bit. Check out around here, make sure no water ends up in there. Lift up that carpet, check that out. That all looks good. Now here's the big part for the trunks. You know, this rust, upon first glance, you might not see it, it might not exist. And some of you know what I'm talking about, but it's behind our battery here. So the Miatas have their batteries in the back, which is totally cool. You're supposed to have an AGM battery in here. Sometimes people put lead batteries in there. Now those can leak, cause all kinds of corrosion, no bueno. And the other issue with the AGM batteries is it's supposed to have this vent tube from the factory, right? So you've got one on each terminal, and then it vents out to under the car through this tube. Now sometimes people will replace the battery, they won't plug that vent tube in, just like what was going on with this car. So luckily I caught it in time. This battery was just replaced last fall. But if you don't plug that vent tube in, you know, stuff can start to leak out of here and cause corrosion. Now the battery tray corrosion is kind of hard to see, but this is the battery tray, and you will see corrosion around here. So the best way to really tell if you've got corrosion here, obviously if you've got it here and you can see it, you've got corrosion for sure. But this is a spot that people commonly miss when looking under the car. So you're gonna go under this bumper here and just look straight up. And there you can kind of see where the battery is venting to, and just check there, because if you've got corrosion here, you know, it can be I've seen it all the way through, just because of those batteries and the way they rust. So check there for sure. And you know, it's pretty easy to spot. Now this I wouldn't say is necessarily a deal breaker. If you've got surface rust back here, you know, there have been plenty of Miatas where I've just had to take out the battery tray and just you know, get rid of all the surface rust, paint it, that kind of thing. So definitely not a deal breaker, but one spot that people commonly miss. All right, so next we've got some issues we got to look at under the hood. All right, so you're thinking, you know, what could be going on down here? It's the engine bay. Shouldn't be a ton of stuff in here. Well, let me show you something about Miatas. So a lot of the times this brake booster right here, or this clutch master cylinder, will start leaking. Now these are both fluids that are very corrosive, right? So if you've got a car that's been sitting for a long time, or a car without a diligent owner, sorry, excuse me, my car is super dirty, but that rust will rust out this little tray under here. And that is a pain to work on, because you know, I've had Miatas with rust there, and you've got to remove the brake booster, clutch slave cylinder, or master cylinder to get down there. So it's not a lot of fun. And the issue is, you can see that there are holes in there, right? And those go to like the main front bulkhead of the chassis, right? So if a ton of brake fluid and, you know, stuff like that leaks down there, you're gonna have internal corrosion, and you'll basically never be able to touch it. It's just way in there. You know, you're kind of gonna be out of luck at that point. So keep an eye out there. And then, you know, just generally check out different parts of the fender. Just make sure there's no rust in this bulkhead here. Haven't really seen this be an issue too much, but just keep an eye on it. And then this side, usually don't have too much to worry about. But also check your strut towers. Some cars like Eclipses, for example, they are notorious for rusty strut towers. Haven't really seen it on too many Miatas, but it doesn't hurt to check. So the next thing we want to do is put our top down, and basically in here there's a plastic tray. Can't quite see it because of the sun, but if those are clogged, you can have all kinds of water in here, in holes like this, and you'll hear it sloshing around. So make sure that your drain rails are clear for your top. And like I said, usually that's something you can kind of peek at. It's easier with the top up, but unfortunately I can't show you guys right now. You can kind of see a leaf in mine actually right here. So continuing on the other side, take a look at the front subframe. These aren't really known for rusting out. Of course they can in extreme cases, but nothing to be super worried about. And if you see a tiny bit of surface rust on the subframe or control arms, that's okay. Those are all removable parts, so you've got nothing to really worry about there. All right, another spot folks sometimes forget to check is under your door. You've got drain holes in your door. If those get clogged up or whatever, your door can retain a lot of water, causing rust issues. And then, while you got the door open, check along here too, because I've seen rust, on this part of the rocker, but not super common. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Like I said, I'll probably remake this to be a little better at some point, but if you're going to look at a first or second gen Miata, those are the spots you got to be aware of. Definitely do not buy the car without checking those out. So thanks for watching, and take care.